What did you wanna be when you were growing up?
A princess.
I love that. No one has answered that.
I mean, a castle and,
Who
like,
doesn't?
beautiful dresses and a big four-poster bed.
I do believe that there's something about what we wanted that shows a little bit about our personalities that we sometimes forget.
Probably, I mean, I still love beautiful ball gowns. So,
Very playful.
how about you? What did you wanna be when you grew up?
A writer,
Mm,
a writer. I went through phases, I think we all do, but that one was the one that stuck the longest. I feel like that's still what I wanna be when I grow up.
yeah.
How about
Well,
you?
now I wanna be a writer when I grow up also. But at 3, princess for sure.
But from princess to entrepreneur is a big jump.
That's interesting. I guess I always saw the princess as being able to do what she wanted and being able to create whatever she wanted. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I can
I
see
think I
it.
see a connection.
I can see it. I can see it. So tell me a little bit about what led you, because you did have a company for a really long time. So from what we've talked, it seems like that was the like real first big thing, right, for you?
Oh, yeah. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. On my dad's side, basically everybody was. My mom wasn't, but her mom was. And so from the time I was little, like literally from 4 years old, my father would ask me, "Honey, what kind of business are you gonna open when you grow up?"
Wow.
Yeah, it was never what kind of job are you gonna have. That was not a word that I even heard. It was what kind of business will you open when you grow up. It was the only option that I ever knew existed.
Wow.
Mhm.
I come from a family of entrepreneurs, but I never had that.
Mm,
And I never actually thought that I would become an entrepreneur.
mm.
So sometimes you never know, but it's interesting. That was forever what you had in your mind.
It really is, because I know that it's not the way that most people are raised,
Right.
right? Most people, your parents want safety for you, and people don't think of entrepreneurship as the safe route. But the way that my dad explained it to me, my dad always said to me, "You have to be in control of your destiny."
Mm.
He literally said to me, I was probably 10, he said to me, "I don't care if you have a hot dog stand on the corner." He said, "Literally, as long as you are in control of your destiny, that's what it's all about."
Wow. And so you build your company. Tell me a little bit about that because I know it was what, 25 years that you had the company before you sold it.
Mm,
And I want to talk a little bit about the journey because I also know there were some winding twists and turns
always.
as always. Tell our guests a little bit about it, what it was, and when did you start it?
My main business, I had a few different ones, but my main business was in the video distribution space,
Mhm.
which means that back when you went to a physical location and you wanted to watch a movie and you got physical medium, a disc or a cassette, and I'm saying that because there may be people listening who never had that experience, plenty. So it sounds like, wait, you did what? And you had these tapes and you had to rewind them? Yeah. So back in those days, I distributed and I sold to all those stores, Blockbuster Video when it was first opening and first starting. We supplied all of that inventory and we stocked their stores. And then there were videos in convenience stores. But what people don't realize is still to this day, if you walk into a public library, there's a huge section of DVDs. And so that's still a business, supplying that physical medium to public libraries. It's a huge source of traffic to them. There are plenty of public library systems that have $1,000,000 budgets to buy
What led
movies.
you to that industry?
It was super random when I was getting out of school, and I had no idea. I started college very young, and my dad at some point even said to me when I turned 17, he's like, "Well, I can pay for the rest of college, or I could just give you the money now, you could start a business." He said, "I'll never give you another dime. This is your only option." But at 17, I knew that I had no idea what I was gonna do, and I knew enough to know that I didn't know how to manage that sum of money. So I said, "Dad, pay for school. I'll figure out a way to get money and start a business on my own later, but for now, I wanna stay in school." So when I graduated from college, And I went off traveling for a bit, and I came back, and I remember my dad picked me up at the airport, and we're driving home, and he looks at me, he's like, "So, what are you gonna do now?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you figured out your life, right?" And I was like,
Wow.
no." And for the first time, my dad looked at me like, "What are you, some kind of loser?" He said
My god.
and he said, "Okay, listen, I opened up a video store. It's this pretty recent thing." He said, "I will give you a job as a clerk. I will pay you minimum wage. You have a job for 1 month." Mind you, it was over an hour away that I had to drive each way, by the way, also. He said, "You have a job for 1 month. You have 1 month to figure your life out."
Mm.
I was like, "Oh, okay, sounds good." So the next morning, literally, I got in my car and I drove over an hour up to the boonies to work at this video store. And the month went by, and of course, I hadn't figured my life out in a month, surprise. But on the last day of the month, my dad called me and he said, "Okay, I just found out the manager is stealing. So you still have a job. You've been promoted to manager of the store." So I worked for my dad for another few months went by. And then my dad's like, "Okay, I wanna open up some more stores." And we looked around at the inventory, and at the time, to stock a video store was really expensive. To buy a tape, they were over $100 wholesale. He said, "But you know what? There's some other stores, and I bet they've got inventory that's slowed down. Let's go drive around and visit some other stores and see if we can pay them cash and buy some inventory from them. They'll be happy about it. We'll be able to open our store at a lower cost." So we did this, and we opened our store at a fraction of the cost of what other people were opening stores at. And then we opened up another one. I was helping him with all of this. And a year goes by. I'm still working for my dad, managing his store. And one day he calls me and he goes, "You're fired." And I was like, okay." And by the way, he says, "You know how we opened up stores and we saved a lot of money in doing that?" He said, "I bet there's a business there." And I was like, "Okay." And I hung up the phone, and it took me a few minutes to put 2 and 2 together and figure out what he was actually saying to me. So I called him back 5 minutes later and I said, "Hey, you've got some excess inventory in your store. Can I take that on consignment and use that to start a business doing this?" And he's like, "Yep." So by 3 PM that day, I was in business. So that's how I got started. And that's what I did for 25 years, and it expanded from working with stores all around the country, buying their excess inventory, buying overstock from eventually the studios and manufacturers, etcetera, and then winding up supplying, as I said, like Blockbuster as they were starting, to mom and pops, to convenience store chains, to public libraries all over the country. So built it into distribution.
Wow. I love this story. Your dad clearly has had an incredible impact in your trajectory, and how great to have someone that pushes you to figure out your life, but in a way that is helping you take control of it.
Yeah, that was very much a fly little bird time.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's interesting about all of that, Maricela, though, I went into that business. There was an incredible market opportunity. I was super lucky to just be at that point to see that market opportunity and to be in a position to take advantage of it. And I am very grateful for that. And on the other hand, another thing I'll say about that, while it was a fantastic opportunity, it provided me entrepreneurship and freedom and all that. If you think about meaning, there wasn't any meaning in it for me. There was nothing in there that spoke to my soul. And the way that manifested, well, at first, the business was actually an amazing opportunity, amazing time. Like any business, when there's an amazing opportunity, other competitors come in, opportunities shrink. Every market ultimately becomes super competitive and margins reduce down
Mhm.
in any marketplace. And that's what happened, of course, in my market. And so that means that business becomes hard. And when business becomes hard, if you are not doing something that you are actually passionate about and that has meaning to you, life becomes hard. And eventually that is what happened. And life became hard when the business became a grind. And I would try all different kinds of things. I had a warehouse that was in Garfield, New Jersey, and it was right next to Passaic, and there was a lot of underprivileged people living in the area, and I tried to recruit single moms, young single moms. There were a lot of girls there that were like 18 to 21 years old, single and had kids, and so I was trying to make my office a social good kind of
Mhm.
place, but all of that came with its own challenges and struggles also. I got a call on a weekend. We had a very busy time, and sometimes we'd work 7 days a week if we were busy filling orders, and I get a call from a warehouse manager on a weekend that one of the girls, her baby daddy is there with a knife to her throat in the
Oh,
bathroom. There's,
wow.
like, I mean, crazy, crazy, crazy stuff was happening. But anyway, and there were days where I just was like, "Ugh, I don't even wanna go to the office. I don't wanna go to work. I don't wanna go in and deal with this myself." And so I found ways. I put people in charge, but you still have to run stuff. And eventually I had a competitor. It was one of I did a lot of work with my competitors because we would exchange inventory when one of us had something we needed. And one of my competitors who knew that I really was looking for a way to get out of the business came to me and suggested that we do a merger. And he had excess capacity in his building, and we could move all of my operations into his building, and he had staff that could run stuff, and I could really take a step out of the day-to-day operations, and it sounded great. And so we did that, and it was great until my business partner started embezzling.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Oh,
Yeah.
what did that feel? Like, I thankfully have never been in a situation like that, but it just feels like it might shake your whole view of how you built the thing and the trust that you put in a person, and I don't know, how did you deal with it, basically, yes.
Yeah. That was the 3rd time that something like that had happened to me. So I had a bookkeeper who I trusted deeply embezzle, forge checks in my name, take a line of credit out
Wow.
of the bank. Really, she seriously almost bankrupted my company. We did wind up having a court case, and she was prosecuted, and she did wind up going to jail for it. I had an employee who had come in and cleaned my warehouse out on a weekend, stolen inventory and stolen leads and gone and tried to set up a competitive business to mine. The first time that it happened with the bookkeeper, when I discovered what she was doing, that felt like a gut punch. Like, it felt like literally somebody had physically punched me in the gut. And I remember I called her and I was just screaming at her and I was crying and I was just hysterical. Even in that time, what I very deeply innately knew was that I could not generalize that to others. So I never let that impact my trust in people or the way that I operate in the world. Unfortunate things happen to people all the time. And that is something that we have to protect ourselves, right? I heard once this great saying, somebody steals from you, like that's the pain in the moment. You keep holding it in your head,
Mm,
you generalize it, then that means that they're stealing from you again and again and again and again. And that you didn't have any choice over the first one, but you have choice over the second. We have
wow.
choice as to what we make things mean. So that I very consciously chose to not let that happen. The second time that it happened, it hurt, not as much as the first time, and it's really interesting, the 3rd time that it happened with my business partner, there was that emotional reaction, and it lasted for a nanosecond. Literally, it's like it started the emotion started to come up, and then instantly I recognized it, and it was like, useless. What actually has happened in the situation, how much damage has been inflicted, what are my options, what do I do now, what are the actions I can take? And that was it. And there was truly with that one, there was never I harbor no ill will towards him. We wound up settling, he wound up paying me back for what he had stolen. We wound up selling the company. At one point, he actually called me and said, "Listen, here's I realize this was really stupid what I did. I can't run the company without you. Can you come back and we be partners again?" I was like,
Wow.
"Lulu, seriously, Lulu." But anyway, we wound up selling the company. I said to him, "Listen," I said, "if we're gonna sell the company, you just have to come clean to whoever we're gonna sell it to if they're going to want to keep you on." So we wound up finding another competitor of ours, and I remember the 3 of us sat down, and he told the guy who was buying the company everything and what had happened and what he had done, etcetera, and the guy that was buying the company said, "Okay, I'm gonna take you on," and they worked out a whole scenario between them. I wanted no part of it. I wanted a
Right.
check and I'm done. Anyway, he called me a year later and said, "I just had to tell you this." He said, "You know, karma, what goes around comes around, I
Mm.
guess." He said, "The guy that we sold the company to has been embezzling and hiding profits from me, and"
Karma. Karma. Karma.
Yeah,
That's just
yeah.
wow.
So, yeah, again, the way I looked at it, Marisol, was people make choices. He was in a position, I guess, where he felt pressure and he felt that this was he made a bad choice. He made a bad choice. He wound up paying for it, but it wasn't worth any of my emotions to get invested in.
Well, honestly, that's so admirable, like, that you were able to separate it and be kind of 1 nanosecond, as you said, and then move towards what it could be. It made me think of 2 things that are kind of woo, but on the one hand, it happened 3 times for you. I don't know if you've heard this, but I know in Buddhism that we do say, like, things happen to you over and over until you, like, make it stop, until
Mhm.
you make the choice, the conscious choice of, "This will not happen to me," and move forward, which is what you did. It made me think of that.
Mm.
And on the other hand, would you have sold the company if that hadn't happened
Mm.
at that moment? Like, thinking about how you said there was no meaning for you in the type of work that you were doing. Like, I wonder that being the catalyst for you to move on to do something different.
I don't know. I will tell you that many times over the years, I would decide, "Ugh, I'm done. I'm out of this business." And the day that I would decide I was out of it, like the phone would ring and some ridiculous huge deal would come in. So I was like, "Universe, what are you trying to tell me
Mhm.
here?" So I don't know. Had he not made a bad choice, we had a great position to
Mhm.
be running a company, which frankly could completely still exist today.
Yeah.
Because I worked really hard to get the public libraries as clients. And if anybody's listening, if you can get public libraries as your clients, they're great clients. They're hard to break into, really hard to break into because they're more systems
Mhm.
oriented. Like they don't care if they save 25% on their bill, unfortunately. But if they can get more inventory, right? So I had to learn how to talk to them, and then they're super resistant to changing
Mm.
suppliers, and they pay their bills, so we coulda still had a great company.
Yeah. I always wonder about these things.
Yeah.
So 2 questions. I know when we talked back a couple months, we talked also about, like, signs of burnout and, like, how you start seeing because you were also it was like you were saying, it was a hard business and it was a lot of work, and even if at some moment you would be like, "Oh, I'm done, I'm leaving," and then another big thing comes, that also comes with more to the pile, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, did you notice like, for me, I think I noticed how burnt out I was after I stopped,
Mm.
like, looking at it in hindsight, while I was running, 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 I didn't see it. So I
Mhm.
wonder if it was similar for you or if you saw more signs as it was happening or what we can be looking out for too.
Yeah, I think that is people don't see burnout while it's happening because you can't. You're running too hard to keep everything in place, and kind of if you stop to look under the hood, it's too much. There's no emotional bandwidth to do that. So you keep going until something breaks, right? And what happens often with people that breaks is their health.
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate. And it would be great for people to have something that's built in where you're paying a little bit more attention to what's happening here, right? What's happening in your heart, what's happening in your mind, what's happening in your body, and what is that telling you? And then also, change is really scary because if you see the signs of burnout, then what do I do with that, right? And then if I leave a situation and you don't have something lined up, you don't know where you're going, that leap is very scary. So very often it doesn't happen until you're pushed. I mean, look, what you said, maybe that's true. Maybe that did all happen because it's finally what pushed me out. I don't know, but it finally did indeed push me out. And usually that's what it takes.
You said about health, and then as you were talking about noticing what's in your mind and your heart and in your body, I've noticed more and more how the embodiment of all of these emotions, like, I see it now more. I've become more attuned, I guess, to when something's not okay because I feel the knot in your stomach or the pressure in your chest, and I think you're right. When we're running, 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 that's not something we can have the space to see.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, we can have the space to see it, and it's too scary because then we wouldn't know what to do with it if we did see it.
Yeah. How was that period for you after having
Mm.
sold the company?
Wow. So I so clearly remember the day because in leading up to selling something, there's a million emails and et cetera going back and forth and details to work out and the lawyers. And I remember the day that I got a call from my lawyer saying, okay, it's done. Everything's signed. Escrow's released. We're done. And I stood there and I was in Italy. I was with one of my friends and I was on the side of the road when the call came in. I was like, oh, okay, great. And I hung up. And what immediately hit me was, like, I'm done. I have nothing to do. There will be no emails coming in. There will be
Mm.
no phone calls coming in. I have nothing to do. And who am I if I have nothing to do?
Oh, that feeling. Oh, I know that feeling.
It was so unexpected to me because I always felt like I was part of an entrepreneurs group and everybody would introduce themselves right away, first thing with what they did. And I would never do that. Like, I always thought, oh, I'm not, my business is one part of me and I do this and I travel and I have all these different interests. But suddenly in that moment, I realized it shocked me what a huge part of my identity work was. And my friend that I was with looked at me, she's like, "This is amazing. What do you wanna do now?" And I was like, "I don't know, get an ice cream." And for a while, I I wouldn't go out to, like, business stuff, like, part of this organization I said I didn't wanna go to meetings because if people would ask me what I was doing and I didn't have an answer, I was like,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
so it was very much a period of feeling lost, wandering in the desert. It's funny, I had a bottle of wine at dinner last night with some friends, and it was the wine is called 8 Years in the Desert, and it was from
Hmm.
a winemaker because when he sold his company, he had a non-compete for 8 years, and this was his first wine, and he called it 8 Years in the Desert, so very apropos. Yeah, I was lost. I was lost and wandering, and I knew that I needed to in order to figure out what I did next, I looked back at the journey that I'd been on, and I looked at the times when business was hard and it felt like a grind, and when I didn't wanna wake up and I was like, "I never wanna feel that way again. I never wanna go through that again." And so, building a business just because it was a good opportunity, if it didn't mean something to me, I knew the price that I would pay if I did that. I didn't know that when I started my business, but I knew it now. So, what could I build next that truly meant something to me? And I realized I had never thought about what really meant something to me. What were my values? What did I want to do in the world? What impact did I want to make? I had never thought about that. And now it was time.
Yesterday, I talked to someone who told me he was going through a period of time a long time ago where kind of dark. And then his therapist asked him, "What do you want?" And he realized no one had ever asked him that. Like he and no one else had ever asked him, which is, I think we do that. We don't want to see that sometimes. We just want to do see the opportunities, see the this more external things maybe in a way than
Mhm.
the internal ones. I do wanna go down the route to understand how you did that, because I know you've done a lot of work and help people with that now. But first, I also wanna ask, because this came to mind, and I think we talked about it when we talked the other day. It's also the different in your period of life, right? Meaning versus opportunity when you're starting out, when you're building your business, when you're, I don't know, in your 20s or earlier in life versus when you're in a more mature, gotten to know yourself more. I don't know. I think there's an aspect of it. I joke that I turned 40 and quit my job the same year, and that's not no coincidence. Like it's there's something I believe that changes in us as we start in the way we make the decisions as we are getting older.
Yes, but I think that's contextual, and I think that's because of the way that we're raised. I
Oh, interesting.
I don't think it has to be that way. As an example, I had a client that I had done a lot of work with, and as you said, now I help people. We'll talk about that. But the work that I had done with him, he said to me, and he had 3 has 3 kids, and at the time, his kids were, I think, 7, one was about 11, and one was 13. And he said, "I wish my kids could do this work at this stage to set themselves up for life." He said, "Could you come and do a retreat with my family and work with my kids to help them understand what their core values are and what their vision for life is?"
I love that.
And you know what? It's actually so much easier with kids. I mean, you have to translate it. I spent a lot of time before I did that studying child development and how to frame it for them, but once you frame it correctly for them, it's so much easier for kids to answer that than it is for adults. Because adults, we have all these shoulds piled up,
Mhm.
and kids don't. Kids know what's important to them. So I worked with these kids and they like wrote out their core values, their manifesto for life, their vision for what impact they wanted to have in the world. They created visual representations of it. It was so heart-filling to see. So no, those kids are going to start out that way.
I love that. I know someone who used to I teach at a college in Brooklyn, and one person who I know used to do a class there, used to teach a seminar on finding your purpose, but they stopped it, and I wish they would have continued to do that. I don't know, I feel like there's something what you're saying is so important, and I see it in my students, like 17, 18-year-old students who what I teach, which is design thinking, is it they're already starting to bring the shoulds. And in my
Mhm.
class, we do a lot of creativity, so it's about just being more open to uncertainty. I think something like this is so valuable. Like, I wish I had that when I was younger.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of book learning, and I loved school and I love learning all the things we do in school, but why don't we have this in school, like, starting at grade school?
Honestly, and it just thinking today about technology and that article, millions of views about how AI is going faster than we think, and it's been a whole thing. These are the things that we're gonna need them like, even more, right? Like,
100%.
some of the skills that we are teaching need to completely change into something that's more fundamental, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now tell me how you went through that process of finding I wanna say finding yourself a little bit, like, finding what it was that was gonna move you again to do something great.
Yeah. 3-year process.
It's never short.
Well, I had no guidance, so I was
Mm.
trying to figure it out all by myself. I was at a conference, and I walked into a workshop on your core values and life purpose, and I was like, "Okay, cool, maybe this will help me." And one of the first things they did was they gave us a sheet of paper, and it had hundreds of values on it, and the instructions were, "Okay, you've got 3 minutes. Go through this list and circle the values and figure out what your top 3 values are."
I've done that. Yes, I've seen that. Yes.
I'm sorry. That's a ridiculous approach. It really is, and I understand a lot of people use that approach, but it's ridiculous, and I realized as I was doing it, I realized 2 things. 1, this is really important. 2, this is a terrible approach to it, because as I looked at that sheet, I remember I circled 35 core values, and I knew even some of the ones that I was circling were things that like, I know this sounds good, this is
Mhm.
something I should value. But I didn't have any way of differentiating. And so when the instructor came over and he looked at me, he's like, you can't have 35 core values. You got to get it down to like 6." And I was like, how? And he looked at me and goes, I don't know.
Very helpful.
Thanks. So I sat through the rest of that workshop, but it landed with me. So I got home and I got big sheets of flip chart paper, and I
My
wrote
favorite.
those 35 words out there, and I had these all over my walls, and I would sit and I would stare at them, and I would go, "Okay, well, how do I group them together? Like, what are some of the things that are similar?"
Mhm.
And so I kept doing that and sort of trying to put them into baskets. And then I'd start asking myself, what is something that leads to something else? Right? What is something that I want because it gets me something else? So I had all of this, and I'm doing this. I've got sticky notes. I'm moving all over the place. Simon Sinek is a friend of mine. Simon came over, and as a favor, I got Simon his first paid speaking gig. So Simon did me a favor, and he came over and to spend a day with
Talk
me to be
about
my
someone to help
personal
you find right.
yeah, yeah. So we're like, "Okay, great, cool, I'll find my personal why." So, we're chatting all day, and at the end of the day, Simon goes, "Okay, got it. Your personal why is fun, learning, and sharing learning and fun with others." I'm like, "That sounds like me for sure. That's super cool." I was like, "So what do I do with that?" And he goes, "Oh, that's above my pay grade." It's like, "Great, okay, I've got my why." And I figured and I knew, okay, that's different from values.
Yeah, I was gonna point that out because
Yeah.
I think and you said 2 things that caught my attention. One is finding what do you want that brings you to something else, and I was gonna ask if you meant, like, values, what that meant. But now they do sound fun, I think could be a value, but and learning too, but a why and values are not necessarily the
Exactly,
same, right?
exactly, right. The why, that had to be how I showed up, that had to be manifesting. But to give you to clarify actually what I said about how one things lead to another. So for instance, I had one bucket that had travel, and it had learning, and it had growth, and a bunch of other things in there. And I would look at all of those things, and I knew for me and again, people will have different buckets because words mean different things to
Mhm.
people. So for me, those things, I knew those things were related. And I'd be like, "Okay, well, what is it about travel that I get? What is it about learning that I get?" I wound up refining all of those things to one core value of wisdom, because all of those things, for me, led to wisdom,
That makes
right?
sense.
So that was part of the process. So I kept doing that and refining those things down. My 3 core values are connection, wisdom, and grace. And so connection, friends fall into that, family falls into that, community falls into that, relationships of every form fall into that, wisdom, learning, travel, growth, adventure, all of those things fall into wisdom for me. Grace, kindness, empathy, all of those things and many others all fall into that for me. So, what I realized after I did that was, okay, anything that I do, I separate values from needs. Needs are what I need to receive. Values are what I uniquely am here to manifest in the world, my gift to the world. So, anything that I choose to do, any project that I choose to do, has to go through that filter of my values, that it has to manifest and magnify those things in the world. It has to
Great
spread
connection.
wisdom, spread connection, etc. And I do it incorporating fun and my all my learning that I love to do and sharing that with others. That's how I do it.
How? Interesting that the why is the how. Again, words, right?
Mhm, yeah.
But you just helped me clarify something about myself right now with this small conversation that I never thought about because I do think it's very common that we mix those 2 up.
Mm,
And I do think as I'm hearing you, how important those 2 filters being separate are. Hmm, note to self. I need to get a little clearer on that.
beautiful.
But it took you 3 years to get through this process of really I think 1 is finding that, but also 2 is really adopting it, so to speak, like, really showing up with it.
I think that the process that I went through there are tons of processes that are out there that are quick hacks. Figure
Mhm.
out your life's purpose in 15 minutes. I see ads for this kind of stuff all the time.
That sounds to me a lot like the list of values, though.
Yeah, totally. And when people do that, they're not tapping into their true core. How many times, because I work with individuals and I work with companies also, how many times, like, I'll have a conversation with the CEO, ask about the core values of the company, and they'll say, like, "Oh, yeah, 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 we did that work already." I'm like, "Great, what are they?" And they'll say, "Oh, integrity, and, and I know there are a couple of others, I don't remember that they're on a piece of paper, the thing is, if you tap into true core values, you will never forget them.
Yeah, you won't
You will
even have to
never have
think
to go
about it.
look for that piece of paper. It's it, like, lands on you deeply in your body, and that's your North Star. Like, it's not hard to figure out from there. If you actually get it right, it's there.
Do you have any advice on how people can even just start through that
Yeah,
process?
yeah, yeah, yeah. The values-based leadership is a real core of what I do, values-based and self-awareness, and, of course, the 2 are tied together because you have to be self-aware to know what your values are. But, look, I would suggest if somebody's trying to work through on their own, start with that. If you've nothing else, start with that list, but just really be aware of what am I picking that's on there because it sounds good, because it's a should, versus what's true to me. Make that list and then ask yourself questions like, well, what are the shoulds? What did I learn from my parents, from the social setting that I grew up in? What were the influences on me? And what did those influences put in that should be my values? And then sit with that list and sit with how much of that actually is true to me. Ask yourself the question, what makes me happy when I see it in the world?
Mm,
What do I believe deeply in my heart makes the world a better place? What do I believe deeply in my heart causes pain in the world, right? Sometimes even doing that, like setting those are like the anti values, right? Sometimes that gives you clarity. Look at how you spend your time.
mm.
Right? With your time and your money, that whatever actually you have that are we all have stuff we have to do, but your free time, your free resources, whatever they are, how do you spend those resources? Ask people that are close to you. If you without knowing anything at all, if you were to say, What do you think I value most in the world?" What would you say?
Mm. What about any advice? Because we're talking about values, and there's 3 buckets that you said, right? Needs and values, which are different. Needs what you need, values what you put out in the world, and
Mhm.
then the why, how do you make that happen? Or, like, how do you show up? Any advice on how to think of that 3rd one? I feel like needs are of the 3 maybe the easiest, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, and a lot of times people conflate needs and values,
Mhm.
so figuring that out.
I really like that distinction, by the way, that you made
Yeah.
of between those 2.
In terms of the how because, like, even knowing what my core values are, there's no job description for that.
What do you do with that
Yeah,
too?
but in terms of the how matters a lot less than the what and the why, because once you know what you're there to magnify, It doesn't matter how you do it. I share with people a story, and it's funny, I get choked up. Maricela, I have told this story probably hundreds of times. I still get choked up every time I tell
Aw.
it. So, I remember there's the Beacon Theater in New York City. I used to go see a lot of live shows there. And down the steps, there was the ladies' room, and there was a woman who was the washroom attendant, and she just stood there and she gave people a hand towel as they washed their hands. If you stood outside of the bathroom, you watched someone walk in, you watched women walk out. It was like a different woman walked out than walked in because the women that walked out all had a smile and the spring in their step because that bathroom attendant, every time she handed someone a paper towel, I will cry.
Aw.
It's crazy, I will cry. Every time she handed someone a paper towel, she made a point of giving a personalized compliment to that woman. It was not, "Oh, you look beautiful," right? It was, "That dress is so complimentary, it makes your eyes sparkle," or, "You have the warmest smile," right? She gave these women a personalized compliment that made them feel so good about themselves.
Mm.
That woman was living her values. She did not, as a little girl, dream of being a bathroom attendant, but where she stood, she chose to make a difference in the world. So the how you do it, when you know what you're here to magnify, the how is less important.
Oh, I like that a lot. It's a great story. I think I've seen her actually.
Mm,
That describes very well what you're trying to say, like what you're saying about the how. Would and I think we sometimes get really or I should said me, get really focused on that. Okay, these are the things that I believe is what I'm here I wanna put out in the world or I wanna make an impact in a way. But always that how, the lenses with which I've been conditioned, I would say, to look at them is still very rigid. And what you're saying really is it doesn't have to be. It's just about bringing it out when whatever it is that you're doing.
mhm.
So how did finding these things, how did that change the trajectory of what you were saying? You didn't wanna show up to these meetings because you the how what do you do question, which I felt that very much. Like, how did this clarity change how you were showing up?
I think it has this impact of it just makes you feel very grounded, right? It, like, lands when you do this work, it lands so deeply on you that, I went from feeling, I said, lost in the desert to feeling grounded and feeling on solid ground. And what's interesting is the position that I was in, people then started asking me, I think people just started noticing and people started asking me about what I'd been doing. And that's eventually how I started doing the kind of coaching and facilitation work that I do. I was lucky I was part of an entrepreneurs organization, and I started doing some facilitation for that organization and started traveling the world and getting to work with leaders all over the world who then started to ask me to coach them individually, to work with their leadership teams, as I mentioned in some instances, to work with their families. And it's work that I absolutely love doing and feel so honored every time somebody trusts me to be able to guide them on this. And and also I get to see the impact, right? I get to see the impact of people who then step into who they truly are, and it changes everything. It changes their leadership when if it's the CEO of a company who steps into this, like, the whole company changes. I've literally had employees in a company call me and say, "Thank you, I know you worked with our CEO," because all of a sudden their values become manifest throughout the organization, and the way the organization operates completely changes as people get aligned. And sometimes there may be people who are not aligned, they will fall off, and everybody else is aligned, all of the friction drops away, and companies bloom, individuals bloom, and then I think this is how we have a ripple impact
Mhm.
on the world.
I love that. Seems like meaning met opportunity.
Mhm, mhm. I think actually also when meaning manifests, opportunity opens up.
Ooh, that's even better. Yeah, that's even better. I guess you start seeing the opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have once you're so grounded in that part.
Yeah, yeah, and opportunities maybe are just attracted, right? When there's a
Mhm.
strong
Yeah,
grounding, opportunities come in.
yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm gonna ask you my last question. If you could go back and talk to Alana back when you were wandering in the desert and you were feeling like that, what would you tell yourself?
Reassurance that there is a way, for sure. Reassurance that there is a way. Everybody finds their way. Nobody stays in the desert forever. It feels like it at the time. It feels like, "Oh my god, I am never getting out of this." But take a breath and yeah, take a breath and enjoy that space for whatever it is. It's a powerful space to be in. That space in between is a very, very powerful space to be in. It feels like the world is falling apart, and perhaps it's an overused cliche, but it is so true, right? It's that caterpillar that crawls into the shell and completely dissolves into goo. And you're in that stage where you are goo, and you will reform and come out as the butterfly.
It's so hard. I've been thinking a lot about this. I actually wrote an article recently about it. But sometimes I feel, for me, this is my own experience, that I've gotten stuck in the goo phase, so to speak. That there's a point where, for some reason, you might get the way I framed it for myself is like left my identity of what I had at work.
Mhm.
But now I've sort of latched on to this identity of being in this liminal space versus moving on to what I should really be doing.
Well, I don't know. Look, in this liminal space, what you're doing right now, for example, in creating this podcast, is you are acting as a goo guide.
I love that. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. It's totally a delight.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if it made you think, feel something, or yell same out loud, leave a quick rating or review. It really helps. If you didn't like it, just pretend this never happened. You can also subscribe on Substack for updates and extras. I'd love to hear from you. Come say hi on Instagram at quitmyjobpod or email me at quitmyjobpod@gmail.com. See you next time.